Welcome to Everything Counts, the podcast where we get real about money, risk, and how to protect what matters most. In the previous episode, we explored the online risks children face from strangers through gaming, social media, and unsupervised screen time. Today, we shift focus to peer-to-peer harm, things like cyberbullying, digital reputational damage, and the emotional toll of oversharing. Do you know the persona your child has online? In a world where kids are creating social media accounts earlier than ever, many of them are curating entire identities, sometimes very different from who they are in real life. The digital space gives them freedom and connection, but it also exposes them to new kinds of risks. Hello, my name is Mateo Faripe, the host of Everything Counts, and we welcome back Emma Sedler-Berkowitz from the digital law company. Emma, welcome back to Everything Counts.
Thank you for having me.
This is a very difficult conversation, and I remember recently, a high school situation where boys were bullying another boy. They record themselves bullying this boy and post it online. That's the real situation that we face and some of the risks that could happen in terms of peer-to-peer harm. I want to know, as a parent that is a victim of a child like that is being bullied and it gets posted online, how do you react? But also, as a parent of a child who is a bully, how do you handle that?
Yeah, and I think it's such an important point to start, this idea of not my kid, not my kid. We call it the NMK syndrome. And actually, yeah, your child. I think that so often when I say to kids, if you wouldn't want your parents to see it, don't let it exist in digital format. And they all kind of roll their eyes. But I can tell you, when I deal with schools, and the first thing we do is we call in the parents and we say, okay, little Susie, you read out what you said in that message. I've literally seen parents faint because it's just like, not my child, not my child. But it is a very, very important starting point. And that is, how do we react when our child has messed up? Which in reality, they will, right? We'd like to hold their hand as much as possible and protect them from the dangers, but they're going to make missteps. Their brains haven't fully functioned yet. That impulse control is not there yet. They are going to be the ones that sometimes mess up. And so I really like people who apologize. I think understanding and educating our children as far as possible. I love it when schools tell me that when they've had a disciplinary issue, what they make the children do is read one of my books and write a book report on it, which sounds like a fate worse than death. But it is very important. And then even sometimes those children get hold of me and they're like, wow, ma'am, because I'm old, they call me ma'am now. Wow, ma'am, like, I didn't even know that was a thing. Like, are you telling me I could be arrested because of this message that I sent to somebody? Yes, absolutely, you can be. So I think as a starting point, let's talk about the legal potential responses. South African criminal capacity starts at the age of 14, which basically means that from 14 years old, a child can be arrested in their own name, taken to prison, and charged with a criminal offense. Now, you referred to some bullying incidents which we've seen in the real world, which is, I think bullying almost underplays it. That was assault with intent to do grievous bodily harm. And we saw in a recent case, 8 children appearing in court the day after that footage went viral on charges of assault. In the online space, there are criminal offenses as well. There are criminal offenses around criminuria, which is when you seriously infringe somebody's dignity. And it's a really helpful one in the fight against online bullying, because if your child is being bullied, even in their direct messages, maybe it's image-based violence, maybe somebody's taken a photo of their face and they've photoshopped it onto a body and turned it into a meme or turned them into a horrible sticker, and it's causing your child immense harm, you can go to the police station and lay a criminal charge against whoever's done that to your child. There's also the protection from a protection order under the Protection from Harassment Act, which is a relatively new law. But I think a lot of parents don't understand that if your child is being bullied in the real world or online, the school isn't taking steps to protect them. You can go up to your local magistrate's court and get a protection order under the Protection from Harassment Act. And if that child so much as sends your child an SMS again, they can be arrested. So the law can be a significantly helpful weapon in the arsenal of the fight against online bullying. But obviously, we would like to keep it as a last resort and get parents to deal with these issues and get schools to deal with these issues.
I think the main danger from a children's point of view, I think they view the online world as a place where there's no consequences. It's not really real. It's all just fun. but it could turn ugly.
Absolutely. I've called this for a long time the cyberspace fallacy, the idea that as soon as you go online, the real world laws and rules don't apply to you anymore. And actually, the opposite is true, Matteo, because as soon as you go online, you're creating a digital footprint. And the evidence is there. And if we think about some of these recent high-profile bullying cases where videos of that bullying, real-world bullying, has gone viral, and as awful as the viewing of that content is, I don't want to say this without sounding crass, but in a way, there's a part of me that's happy that content exists because of the evidentiary value, that nobody can deny that that's happening if there's a video of it. The fact that the kids were taking videos of themselves perpetrating these criminal offenses is wild. It's a sort of a selfie incrimination. But I'm very happy that that content exists because of the value it poses from an evidence point of view. And one of the first things that happened, because this high-profile case we're talking about, the kids it's been delayed until late January, the case, which gives the children the time to write their matric exams. But the very first thing that happened in their very first court appearance, in which they were charged with this assault with intent to do grievous bodily harm, is that all of the phones were confiscated and the passwords and PINs had to be handed over to the police for further investigation, which means that all of those videos, all of that evidence can and will be used in disciplinary processes and in court cases. So, and it's also one of the benefits of cyberbullying is that in the old days where bullying existed and you went to the principal and you said, sir, this person said this thing to me, there was, a he said, she said situation. Now we take a screenshot and we say, look what happened, try and deny it now, and they have to deal with it.
When we look at predators online, we often think of dark characters that could be behind certain accounts, we perceive that they would be older. But for children, it could be their peers that deal out some of those harmful things that happen online, whether it's on group chats, on WhatsApp, or even on their social media accounts. From your point of view, in the world that you're working in, that peer-to-peer harm amongst children, how prevalent is that in our society?
I'm afraid it's very prevalent, and it's getting younger and younger. Just yesterday, I was dealing with a case of boys at a school in grade 6, one of the best schools in the country, and they were extorting a child on the basis that they were going to release content about the person. It was, in this case, deep fake content, AI-generated content, but I see it with real content as well, unless this kid paid. And it turned out they're all involved in these online gambling sort of syndicates already in primary school. So we're seeing that sort of financial incentive to extort even their own peers. And some of the extortion cases that I deal with, often we're dealing with international, very sophisticated criminal syndicates. But sometimes we're literally dealing with somebody in your own class who is extorting you because they want to buy drugs, or they want to use it for online gambling, or they just want to buy themselves the latest designer clothes. When it comes to the sexual exploitation of children, we're also seeing huge developments. And I think that this is really a knock-on of children growing up with pornography as their sexual education. And for the first time in the United Kingdom last year, over half of the offenses, sexual offenses committed against children, were committed by other children.
I'm going to need you to say that again.
Yeah, I know, it's so jarring. Because what I'm saying is that historically, where children have been victims of sexual offenses, it's dirty old pedophiles, right? It's exactly the kind of creepy people we think of lurking in the shadows, and certainly adults, right? But now, for the first time, over 50% of those offenses, sexual offenses committed against children, are committed by other children. And I'm seeing it in the South African context. In our recent case that we've had against Meta, a lot of the content that was being circulated, child sexual abuse material, what unfortunately our law in South Africa still refers to as child pornography. It was user-generated content. It was kids really causing extraordinary, immense, irreparable harm against other children. And it was also, we saw a lot of the sort of manosphere culture coming in, where kids were being leaked, so nudes that these kids had taken and sent presumably to somebody who they thought was a safe person to send it to, being circulated on these huge WhatsApp channels with 50,000 other teenagers on those groups. And we know that there were suicides as a direct consequence of those children being leaked. And a lot of the content, when the perpetrators were asked on the groups, why are you doing this? It was we're saving our country. You know, we're fixing our country. We didn't ruin these kids' lives. They ruined their lives. They should never have taken those pictures in the first place. So the peer-to-peer harm that we're seeing from tweens is huge. And really we're dealing with tweens and teens, but I can tell you that the worst category of content that I see is from children in the 10 to 14 age range. Generally, they get kinder, they get nicer, they get more aware of the kind of harm that can be caused with those tweens. And I think it's really a direct consequence of the fact that the brain has not finished developing yet. So our brains develop from the back to the front, and all of that impulse control, decision-making happens in the front of the brain, in the prefrontal cortex. And that's the very last thing that develops. So what we're doing, I believe, when we put a phone, a smartphone, in the hands of a 10 to 14-year-old, it's like giving them the keys to a Lamborghini and saying, and with no seatbelts and no airbags and no driver's license and no awareness of the rules of the road, and saying good luck to you. You know, so I think if I can make one plea to parents, delay is the way. As far as possible, if we can delay our children's access to these technologies, the better outcomes we'll have. Physical outcomes, emotional outcomes. We're going to grow much better humans.
From a parenting point of view, I mean, you would feel safe seeing your child chat to another child online, their peers, it's fine, they're talking about gaming or school. But how important is it to make sure that your child has the same persona at home that they do online?
Yeah, I think that's probably an impossible task, right? Everybody online is happier, shinier, more beautiful. We're all filtered. We have these online personas. I mean, even when people meet me sometimes in the real world, they're like, oh, you're much more fun than you are online. I was like, yeah, well, it's my job to be legit online, right?
A bit serious.
It's a little bit, I'm a boring lawyer. But it is, I think, one of those fundamentals that we've got to inculcate in our children from a young age is that the online world is just an extension of the real world. And I have been teaching literally from primary school to captains of industry, and anybody who's heard me talk before will be bored of this, but it's still the very best test, what I call the billboard test, which is before you let anything exist in digital format, inside your phone, inside your friend's phone, maybe it's a photo, maybe it's a video, maybe it's something that you're going to put as a disappearing story or a view once picture or a post you're going to put on social media. Ask yourself, would you put it on a billboard next to a huge photograph of your face? And for the children, they must really imagine themselves in their school uniform, next to their name in huge writing, huge flashing writing, unmissable, the name of their school, and then whatever it is they're about to let exist in digital format. If they wouldn't put that on the biggest billboard in the busiest, next to the busiest road near where they live or where they go to school, then that content has no place existing.
Well, if you put it like that, I don't think I'd post much myself.
But it's a very good reminder, right? And I even talk about it when I get complicated questions at the end of corporate talks. You know, I've got very strong views about religion or politics. Can I publish this, or could this compromise my job opportunities? My default is just simply, would you put it on a billboard? Would you put it on a billboard next to your company's name? And for the children, the school's name, because the school's code of conduct applies even outside of school hours and outside of school premises. You know, if you think when we were at school, well, certainly when I was at school, I knew that I had to behave in a certain way when I was at school, when I was at a school function, when I was at a school event. I couldn't embarrass my parents, but I couldn't embarrass the school, which is why if I walk into a restaurant tonight and I see a kid from X school in their school uniform and they've got a beer in one hand and a vape in the other, they can get into trouble at school because they can be recognized as a student of that school, and therefore the potential exists for you to bring the school into disrepute. And the reality is that we're all celebrities in the digital age. We are all celebrities. We can all be identified as soon as your face features, even if it's just the other kids in your class. They know where you go to school. Your teachers know where you go to school. So when that content goes viral, then disciplinary consequences can follow, even if that behavior happened outside of school.
Let's talk about oversharing then, segue into that conversation, because you take your photo with your friends, you're wearing your school blazers, you're doing something you're not supposed to be doing, or even when it's just innocent. It's early in the school run and you've just been dropped off by your parents. You're saying, I look cool today, I just had a haircut. The dangers of letting people know where you go to school, your routine as a family, when you leave the house, how dangerous is that?
Yeah, I think that maybe the best way of thinking of it is you never know when you're going to suddenly be thrust into the spotlight. You know, if you think about, for example, these families that have just been involved in this horrific bullying case, And literally every single morsel of content that has ever been shared by those children involved, by their parents, is going to be dug up by the digital vigilante mob. And I don't use the word vigilante necessarily negatively, because I think that consequence culture, as a term I prefer to cancel culture, is a very important part of how we self-regulate the internet. But you never know when it's you who's going to be thrust into the limelight. So certainly from a reputation management point of view, we know that Donald Trump has announced that if any South African student wants to study at a university in America, not only do they need to hand over all of their social media handles, they also need to go and make them public so that they can go and check you out and check every single thing that you've ever posted out, right? So there's the reputation management aspect of it, but there's also a safety element of it. Instagram's just brought out a maps function, which Snapchat has had for a long time. It's called Snap Maps, where you can see exactly where anybody is at any given time. We saw with Kim Kardashian, for example, when she posted that photo on Instagram from a hotel room in France, and she had her location services on in the background, not even realizing that geodata was attaching to the photo, meant that criminals could look at that picture and could tell not just which hotel she was in, but which room in that hotel she was in. And an armed gang came in, tied her up, guns to her head, and they stole 10 million euros worth of jewelry that night. And in that case, the insurance company did pay, but I'm seeing insurance companies in South Africa repudiating claims because people have shared too much information. Sometimes it's even the children who are sharing too much information.
So it can be seen as reckless.
100%. So I suppose we can default back to the billboard test. What is it that you would want the general public to know? Do we want everybody to know where our child goes to school, what uniform they're in, what their interests are, where they live? It's inculcating in children from a very young age basic digital hygiene. We don't share personal information with people online. If somebody asks you for what job does your mum do, or what's your home address, or can I have your cell phone number, what school do you go to, or can I have a picture of your feet? All of those questions should make the child feel uncomfortable, and a short, sharp no. And in teaching our children how to say no, because sometimes it's quite hard to say no, and sometimes you don't want to be that person, you don't want to be prudish. So empowering our children with the power of a short, sharp no is a very important thing. I always say to the kids, if anybody asks you for anything that you don't feel comfortable sending, you just say no, and if they ask you again, you block them. Right, that's you warn your friends about
the no is enough.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that those are the kinds of conversations we should be having with our children from a young age, is how do we handle it? So I've even now in my parents tips document, and anybody listening is so welcome to DM me and I'll send it to them. Social scripts for tricky situations. How do we respond when somebody in an online gaming chat room asks us for personal information? How do we respond when people ask for nudes? Those scripts, particularly for the young children who don't yet have the confidence to stand up to people, I think can be incredibly valuable.
Let's look at then the shame of being a victim online, whether it's cyberbullying or somebody sharing a photo of you that you didn't want them to share. It's suddenly out there, you log off your accounts, the emotional and psychological effects of going through something like that.
Absolutely. The internet is permanent, that people can post something now and it's still online in 5 or 10 years is a wild idea. So if we just think about how bullying has changed, and bullying has existed since time immemorial, but it's changed significantly because it's faceless, so the content is worse. And even the adults watching would know that if you're sitting at a restaurant, to say to the face of a crying waitress that you've had a terrible time is a lot harder than going home and writing a vicious review on a restaurant review site, right? So it's faceless, so the content is worse. It's often anonymous. So people hide behind the anonymity. And if I was the boss of the world, I would make it illegal for people to be anonymous online. I think the root of just about all harm online is anonymity. But we do see these kids creating these fake accounts, burner accounts, Finster accounts to cause another person harm. And my very strong message to children is, if anybody has ever created a fake account to cause another person harm, you are not a nice person, and you need to go and have a chat with yourself in the mirror, and you need to do better. And really those ground rules in place from a very young age. So the facelessness of it, the anonymity of it, but the permanence of it, the inescapability of it, that if you were being bullied, even if you were being bullied nonstop at school, you could go home at the end of the day, get out of your school uniform and forget about it for the night or for the weekend, and now that follows you. So we've seen huge increases in mental health issues, suicidal ideation. If we think about some of the stats that were released by the NHS last year, which for me was so jarring, which was that admissions to hospital and visits to ER of children under the age of 18, so we're dealing with adolescents, we're dealing with tweens and teens, for real world injuries has plummeted. The kids are not hurting themselves, Matteo. They're not falling out of the tree and breaking their arm because they're not climbing the tree in the first place because they're glued to their screens. So that for me was a very powerful, and I've got young children, get the kids out and playing. We want them to hurt themselves, not too badly, obviously, but we want them to experience real life. But the more concerning of the stats was that the admissions to hospital and visits to ER for emotional harm, mental health concerns, suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, panic attacks, depression, anxiety disorders has skyrocketed. So our duty as parents is, how do we level that? How do we get our children out and experiencing the real world more and not just being glued to their screens?
And it's not always enough to try and be your children's favorite by giving them all the screens they want on all the access they want online. It's also a good idea, like you mentioned earlier, to say no sometimes, delay that process, and take them through what the dangers are, the responsibilities that they need to have before you even hand them the phone.
So what I always say is, let your children hate you for as long as possible. And I know it's a very extreme thing to say, but delay for longer than feels comfortable, right? So if I was the boss of the world, smartphones would certainly be banned for all children in primary schools. There's been a fabulous new movement launched in South Africa called the Smartphone Free Childhood, which is an idea of getting all the parents together, collective action, getting all parents to hold out for as long as possible. The data is so clear. It's inescapable that we are doing our children a huge disservice by putting these devices in their hands when they're very young. So no smartphones at all in primary school. In high school, having a bell-to-bell ban means from the very first bell of the school day, the academic day, till the last bell of the academic day, those phones ideally should be locked away, whether it's in a pouch or a locker, or they get handed in, just because the distraction we know. I mean, I know how hard it is to get work done when I've got my little distraction device nearby, and sometimes I even lock mine away to just get some piece of work out. So, and a lot of the teachers are saying to us, they can spend up to 40% of a class telling kids to put their phones away. It's really taking away from the academic time. And I really think that if we can try and collectively delay for as long as possible, then we don't have the position of your child coming home and saying, oh, but mummy, I'm the only one in grade 5 who's not on the WhatsApp group, and I'm being left out, and everyone else is playing Roblox, and everybody else is on Snapchat, and I can't even use filters on Snapchat, and my life sucks so much. Like, let's get parents together as far as possible to collectively hold out.
Can educational institutions do more in terms of, like you're saying, the bell to bell, but also the education of a persona online as a young person?
Absolutely. And I think that digital literacy starts from a very, very young age. My daughter is 6 and she came home from school yesterday and she'd had a protective behaviors lesson that day. And she told me, Mummy, Auntie, and then that's the name of the lady, she said, if we're ever watching something on a phone or on a tablet or on TV and we see something like somebody shows private parts, we must immediately look away. And I said to my husband this morning, I'm so happy they're learning about it. And he was like, this is terrifying. Why do they have to learn about it? I'm like, well, half the class is already on YouTube Kids for a few hours every day. They're seeing that stuff, right? And it's a very difficult line, especially when I'm speaking in primary schools, because you don't want to be the one that teaches them about pornography and predators and those kind of things. But to be honest with you, as soon as they're online, they've seen it all. The internet has no shallow end. Once the children are online, they're online. They are going to come across inappropriate material. They are going to come across predators. They are going to come across content which has a significant impact on their physical and emotional well-being. And we need to make sure that we're only putting them in that position when we are confident enough that they are going to be safe. And I know that's a very difficult thing to say, but I suppose the analogy is, somebody said to me, like, at what age is your child going to get a phone? I'll be like, well, when I would be confident to drop them off at a party where I know there's going to be drugs, alcohol, literally that is what they're going to see as soon as you give them that device. And we can put parental controls and we can try as far as possible to cotton wool wrap them and protect them from that content. But the reality is the internet has no shallow end.
And as you say, eventually you're going to have to hand the device to them, buy them the phone that they want. They're now in their preteens, the teens. How do you get to the conversation of being mindful online and the things they need to look after for, and what they're responsible for as soon as they create that account.
Absolutely. So I think understanding that you're responsible for your own content, but also that you're responsible for what you're following, what you're liking, what you're sharing, even being on a WhatsApp group where there's horrific content being circulated on that group, even if you're not an active participant. What the law says in South Africa is that you can be legally responsible for what is being shared on that because you have the ability to remove yourself from that group. So I think really teaching our children about basic digital hygiene, but also the rules of the digital highway. It sounds such a silly thing to say, but I believe that getting your first phone should come with a license. Before we let a child drive a car, which is a dangerous thing, we make sure that they've passed their learner's license, that they've learned the rules of the road. But with phones, which can also be a dangerous thing, we're just kind of thrusting them in the hands of these tiny children and saying, good luck to you. And we are literally throwing them in the deep end. So I think education is critical. Parents, as far as possible, staying up to date, staying aware of the big issues, delay for longer than is comfortable, and speaking to other parents. I've got a friend who I won't let drive my children because I know she's very laissez-faire about seatbelts. There are literally people's houses I won't send my children to because there's just free tech and I'm not ready for it yet. So it's being aware of what other people in your circle, in your village, what their rules are about screen time as well.
Let's look down the tips that parents can use to make sure their children are safe online, but also that they're aware of certain things when their children have these accounts. Some of the things that you were talking about earlier, I mean, there's no shallow end on the internet. I think that struck me. But some of the tools, things that they need to look out for and tips.
Number one rule, no tech in the bedrooms, ever. Number two rule, no tech in the bedroom overnight. I know that those are, I've almost reiterated myself there, but the one is, making sure that if they're playing games, if they're watching YouTube, they're doing it in the living room. They're doing it where other people are around. I think as soon as you start having tech behind closed doors with little kids, dodgy stuff is happening. If I could get on my knees and still be in shot now, I would do it, right? Please, if parents out there make one change as a result of listening to us talk today, it's making sure that they are not sleeping with any tech in their bedroom. No phone next to the bed. They'll tell you they need an alarm clock. You go and buy them an alarm clock. They cost about 200 ZAR from Clicks. And you take away the phone because if they've got them, they're on them. Sleep is so critical. Just this morning, I read the most interesting stat, which basically said that teenagers whose parents let them stay up until midnight have a 24% increased risk of depression and a 20% increased risk of suicidal ideation, which to us just makes sense. Like, life is hard. If you don't sleep, life is harder.
You need to rest.
And the thing about having those little distraction devices in their bedrooms, I struggle sometimes to stop scrolling at night when it's time to go to bed. How are we going to put somebody whose brain is not fully developed yet in a position where they have to take responsibility for turning off their phone? And then they wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and they check to see if they've missed out anything on the group chat. And then 3 hours later, they're still watching YouTube shorts or they're on TikTok. Or the academic outcomes are appalling if they don't sleep. The sport outcomes, the mental health outcomes, it's all a disaster. So making sure there is no tech in the bedroom is the second most important thing. The third is delay for as long as possible. If I was the boss of the world, I would make illegal for children under the age of 16 to be on social media, because I think saying at 13, that's the age of digital majority is a pretty mad idea. 13 is probably the worst time for cyberbullying and for just being a human. And then to throw a phone into the mix is really a difficult thing. So I would say no social media until 16 years old. I do think having ground rules for devices is important. So I quite like the idea of a smartphone contract when your child gets their phone for the first time, which kind of like the rules of engagement. The internet is awash with the different examples. There's a free one to download on my website. You make any changes, but you find one that resonates with you. And then I would say the last thing is education. Literally making them sit down and read one of my books or watch a webinar, or understanding the legal consequences, the disciplinary consequences, and the impact to reputation is, I think, absolutely critical.
Look, when it comes to this topic, I really want to make you the boss of the world, because I'm going to try delay it as much as I can. I've got a 6-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I know the 6-year-old definitely will be begging me for a screen at some point. I'll definitely remember these points.
And I know a lot of what I've said is very pessimistic and negative and scary, but I can tell you hand on heart that change is happening and the world is waking up. Thankfully, there's been, in the last, I would say 18 months, a fundamental shift in particularly how parents are viewing the digital world. And I know that my 6-year-old, you've got a 6-year-old, I know that when our children finish primary school, it'll be unheard of for a child to have a handheld device. The change is coming, but it comes with the parents getting together and saying, we're all going to hold out.
Another fascinating conversation reminding us that cyberbullying and oversharing are real threats, but with the right tools, awareness, and support, families can stay ahead. Thank you to Emma for your insights, and to our listeners and viewers, let's keep having the hard conversations, because when it comes to your child's safety, everything counts.